In the quiet American town of Red Ridge, the name Samuel Blake once struck pride and respect among its citizens. A retired sheriff, Blake was known for his dedication to justice. Years ago, Red Ridge was a peaceful town, nestled between rolling hills and vast open plains, where people lived simple, content lives. But that peace was shattered when Garret Shaw, a notorious outlaw, and his gang of bandits arrived, bringing terror and lawlessness to Red Ridge. Garret Shaw was feared across the region. His ruthless gang raided towns, robbed travelers, and left a trail of destruction wherever they went. Red Ridge became one of Garret's prime targets, a place for his gang to rob, intimidate, and exploit to their heart's content. Despite being outnumbered, Sheriff Blake tried to protect Red Ridge from Garret's tyranny, determined to shield the people he loved. Blake stood firm, refusing to let Garret take control of the town, his courage inspiring the townsfolk, though fear gripped them all. But Garret's influence was powerful. He had money, weapons, and men willing to do his bidding without hesitation or remorse. Blake's resolve only enraged Garret, who viewed the sheriff's defiance as a challenge to his authority over Red Ridge. One night, Garret and his men stormed into Red Ridge with a brutal plan, targeting the sheriff and anyone who dared to oppose them. They attacked Blake's home, a peaceful farmhouse on the outskirts of town, intending to crush his spirit and end his resistance. Blake's family was inside, innocent victims of Garret's thirst for vengeance. The night turned into a nightmare of violence and loss. When dawn broke, the damage was done. Blake's wife and children were gone, leaving him alone, broken and filled with grief. The townsfolk mourned the tragedy, but fear of Garret kept them silent. No one dared to oppose the outlaw and his brutal methods. In the days that followed, Red Ridge fell deeper under Garret's control, the townsfolk forced to bow to his every demand. Garret's men collected protection fees from local businesses, claiming they were protecting them from threats, while being the threat themselves. Red Ridge's once busy streets became quiet, filled with fear and suspicion, as Garret and his gang prowled the town at will. The people of Red Ridge felt helpless. They had seen what happened to Blake and feared that the same fate awaited anyone who resisted. Blake, devastated by his loss, withdrew from public life, becoming a solitary figure, haunted by memories of his family and his failure to protect them. Yet, deep within, a spark of vengeance began to grow. Blake knew that Garret couldn't be allowed to continue his reign of terror. Red Ridge needed a hero, someone who could stand up to Garret and restore peace to the town, but who would answer the call. Blake realized that he could not rest until Garret faced justice, but he would need help from men who knew the life of an outlaw. He began thinking of ways to find people with the skills needed to take on Garret, men with the courage to stand against the bandit. Blake started gathering information, learning the whereabouts of individuals with reputations for survival and a disdain for Garret Shaw. He visited old contacts, men who once walked the line between law and crime, hoping to find allies against Garret's tyranny. The people of Red Ridge noticed a change in Blake, a new determination in his eyes, a man on a mission with nothing to lose. But Garret's spies were everywhere, watching Blake's every move, aware that the ex-sheriff was plotting something bold and dangerous. Blake knew time was running out. If he didn't act soon, Garret's grip on Red Ridge would be permanent, sealing the town's fate forever. As he prepared to make his next move, Blake's thoughts lingered on revenge, but also on redemption for the lives lost to Garret's cruelty. And so, with a heavy heart and a steely resolve, Blake began his plan to end Garret's tyranny once and for all, no matter the cost. In a dusty jail cell miles from Red Ridge, two notorious small-time criminals, Jake the Fox Dalton and Vince Wildcard Carter, awaited their next move. Jake and Vince were known across the region for their quick wits, bold heists, and a peculiar sense of loyalty to each other, despite their reckless lives. Jake, the older of the two, was a sharp-minded, strategic thinker. He was skilled at reading people, always calculating his next move. Vince, in contrast, was impulsive and wild, preferring action over planning, His strength and fearless attitude made him a natural fighter. Despite their differences, Jake and Vince were inseparable, bound by a past filled with hardship and shared survival on the fringes of society. Together, they had pulled off a string of heists, outsmarting local lawmen and making quick escapes that earned them a reputation as outlaws. Their latest job, however, had gone wrong. A bank heist in a nearby town led to their capture, and now, to jail cells with uncertain futures. Samuel Blake had heard of Jake and Vince through his network of old contacts, intrigued by tales of their skills and resourcefulness. Blake's contacts told him about how the two men narrowly escaped Garret's ambush in the past, giving them first-hand experience of his ruthlessness. Intrigued, Blake decided to investigate further, realizing that Jake and Vince's knowledge of the outlaw world could make them valuable allies. A plan began forming in Blake's mind. He would reach out to Jake and Vince, offering them a chance at freedom in exchange for their help. Blake made arrangements to visit the prison, his old badge and reputation granting him access to the two men's holding cell. As Blake entered the cell, he found Jake leaning against the wall, calm and composed, while Vince paced restlessly, a caged lion. Blake introduced himself, getting straight to the point. He needed their help to take down Garret Shaw, and he could arrange their release. Jake raised an eyebrow, skeptical. Why would an ex-sheriff risk everything for revenge? Blake's story held his attention nonetheless. Blake shared his tale of loss, the murder of his family and Garret's tyranny over Red Ridge. His words were heavy, his intent unwavering. Vince, despite his usual impulsiveness, was silent, feeling the weight of Blake's tragedy. The sheriff's grief and determination moved him. Blake promised them freedom, but only if they helped him bring down Garret. It was a risky offer, but also a shot at redemption. Jake and Vince exchanged glances. For the first time, they saw a way to use their skills for something bigger than themselves. Jake, always the thinker, asked for a moment alone with Vince. Together, they discussed the risks and potential rewards of the offer. Jake reminded Vince that Garret had nearly killed them once before. This was a chance to settle that score and walk away free men. Vince, always up for a fight, needed little convincing. The thought of taking down Garret was tempting, even if it was dangerous. They returned to Blake and agreed to his terms, shaking hands in a pact sealed by mutual trust and a shared desire for revenge. Blake wasted no time, arranging for their release the very next day. Jake and Vince were now free men with a mission. As they left the prison, Blake laid out the plan. They would train, gather intelligence, and strike Garret when he least expected it. Blake knew that their combined strengths, his knowledge, Jake's strategy, and Vince's fearlessness, could be Garret's undoing. Jake and Vince, once outlaws with nothing to lose, now felt a sense of purpose. They knew the road ahead would be dangerous. For the first time, they saw a chance at redemption, a path that could lead them away from crime and toward something meaningful. As they rode back to Red Ridge with Blake, they silently vowed to give everything they had to take down Garret Shaw. The stage was set, and the unlikely trio began their journey, each driven by vengeance, justice, and a chance for redemption. Jake, Vince, and Blake rode into Red Ridge, their eyes scanning the streets that were once vibrant, but now felt cold and tense under Garret Shaw's control. The townsfolk cast wary glances from behind closed windows. They whispered and shuffled away, fearful of Garret's spies who lurked in every corner. Blake led the trio to a secluded spot in town, explaining that Garret's men were everywhere, and they couldn't risk being recognized too soon. Jake smirked, feeling a familiar rush of adrenaline. They were back in the game, but this time, their stakes were higher than ever before. Vince, always restless, clenched his fists, eager to take action. But Blake reminded him of the need for patience. They couldn't act recklessly now. Their first stop was an old friend of Blake's, a shopkeeper named Eli, who had been a silent supporter in Blake's fight for justice. Eli greeted Blake cautiously, his eyes shifting nervously around. Even a simple conversation carried risks in a town ruled by fear. Eli shared grim updates. Garret's control had tightened. Many were too terrified to oppose him openly, fearing they'd disappear overnight. As Eli spoke, a shadow appeared outside the window, a figure lurking in the alley. Watching, Jake noticed it first, signaling to Blake. They fell silent, tension thickening the air. Had Garret already gotten wind of their arrival, or was this just a spy on routine patrol? Blake signaled Eli to stay quiet as Jake and Vince moved to the back of the shop, slipping into the shadows, ready to confront whoever was outside. Jake peered out, seeing the figure retreating but still glancing over his shoulder, as though suspicious of something amiss. Vince, itching for a fight, wanted to follow, but Blake shook his head. Confronting the spy would only raise alarms they couldn't afford. They waited until the figure disappeared into the night. Tension simmered as they realized that Garret might already be aware of Blake's return. As they left Eli's shop, Blake instructed them to keep a low profile. They would have to move carefully, one step at a time. The next day, Jake and Vince began exploring Red Ridge, blending in with locals, observing Garret's men and noting their routines. They spotted a group of Garret's thugs terrorizing a family on the outskirts, demanding payment and making cruel threats. Vince clenched his fists, but Jake held him back. They couldn't act yet. Any move would alert Garret before they were ready. The plan was clear: gather intel, lay low, and find out just how deep Garret's network ran. Blake needed every detail to succeed. At night, Jake and Vince met with Blake in a hidden cabin outside town. There, they strategized and shared what they had observed. But a feeling of unease lingered. Blake's instincts told him they were being watched. Someone, somewhere, was tracking their every move. Days passed with the trio carefully studying Garret's operations. Each day, the suspense grew, and the stakes felt impossibly high. Blake knew that their mission was a ticking clock. At any moment, they could be discovered, and Garret would show no mercy. One night, as Vince returned from scouting, he noticed a figure following him, a shadow in the darkness that vanished before he could react. He told Jake, who nodded gravely. They agreed to heighten their caution, realizing that Garret's eyes were everywhere. Blake remained calm but alert, reminding Jake and Vince that Garret's suspicion was expected. It was only a matter of time before things heated up. Finally, after days of gathering intel, the trio began to piece together Garret's weaknesses and the men he trusted most in Red Ridge. They knew it was time to make their first move, but as dawn approached, there was a knock on their cabin door, a signal they weren't alone. Jake and Vince drew their guns, eyes darting to Blake. The knock was soft, cautious, but in a town under Garret's rule, trust was a luxury. Blake stepped forward, heart pounding, as he opened the door to face whoever was outside, the shadowy figure barely visible in the dim light. As Blake opened the cabin door, a familiar face appeared. It was Eli, the shopkeeper. He looked shaken, his eyes darting around nervously. Eli whispered urgently, "Garret's men know about you three. They're coming tonight. You have to make your move now, or it's over." Blake nodded, his mind racing. Their time was up. Garret was onto them, but maybe, just maybe, they could turn this to their advantage. Jake suggested an ambush. They'd set up traps in town, using the cover of night to even the odds against Garret's well-armed men. Blake, Jake, and Vince scattered across town, each setting up diversions and readying themselves for a final decisive battle. As the first signs of Garret's men appeared in the distance, Blake gave a signal, and the traps sprang into action. A series of explosions and loud noises erupted, creating chaos and disorientation among Garret's gang as they entered Red Ridge. Jake and Vince moved swiftly, taking advantage of the confusion to pick off Garret's men one by one, their years of criminal skills put to a different use. Meanwhile, Blake went straight for Garret, seeking the final confrontation he'd dreamed of since losing his family. Garret, surrounded by his few remaining loyal men, stood in the center of town, daring Blake to face him head-on. With a calm resolve, Blake approached, his gaze steady. "You took everything from me, Garret. Tonight it ends." Garret laughed, dismissing Blake's threat. "You're outnumbered, old man. "This town belongs to me." But as Garret's men prepared to attack, they hesitated, seeing the determination in Blake's eyes and the burning anger in Jake and Vince's. Suddenly, a gunfight erupted. Blake, Jake, and Vince fought side by side, each knowing there was no turning back now. In the chaos, Garret's men began to fall. They were unprepared for the sheer grit and precision of Blake's small team. The townspeople watching from the shadows began to rally, finally standing up against Garret and his reign of terror. Vince tackled one of Garret's key henchmen, disarming him in a flash and turning his weapon against the others, clearing a path for Blake. Jake found himself face to face with Garret, his old fear replaced with determination, as he threw the outlaw off balance. Garret stumbled, but as he regained his footing, he reached for a hidden pistol, aiming straight at Blake, who was just a few feet away. At that moment, a gunshot echoed. Vince had fired first, hitting Garret in the shoulder, making him drop his weapon in pain. Garret, cornered and wounded, snarled defiantly, realizing that his hold over Red Ridge was crumbling in front of him. Blake took a step forward, speaking with finality. "This is for my family and everyone you terrorized." He raised his gun, ending it. The town fell silent. Garret Shaw was gone. The weight of Blake's long journey lifted, and he lowered his gun, weary but victorious. Jake and Vince stood beside Blake, each realizing they'd done something they never thought possible. They'd helped a town break free. As dawn broke, the townspeople emerged from hiding, gathering around Blake, Jake, and Vince with gratitude and respect. Blake addressed the people of Red Ridge, urging them to reclaim their lives and keep the town safe from anyone like Garret. With Red Ridge now free, Blake turned to Jake and Vince, offering them a chance to start over, to live a life beyond crime. Jake looked at Vince, nodding slowly. They both felt the impact of what they had accomplished, knowing it would stay with them forever. With one last look at the town, Blake, Jake, and Vince rode off into the horizon, leaving Red Ridge a safer, freer place. As they disappeared into the distance, the townsfolk knew their saviors and aims, and the legend of their courage spread across the land.